So welcome to the 10th episode of the Wags and Fresh podcast. I'm Justin Wagner. He's Dr. John Fresh. So today's word is focus. And there's been a lot of back and forth with John and I on some topics and some exciting things developing on that. So I wanted to jump right into that. And I wanted to kind of let you start off with some of the things that have sort of been around that word for you this week.
I had a lot of cool stuff with it. So first, once you obviously put your focus on something and give it your attention, it's going to produce a result. So as I was even working through the word, and we could get into the details of where I applied it, I got hooked on focus as being a light. That, people wonder, do they need to generate it, or I need more focus? And one of the conclusions I came to was that we have plenty of it. It's just diverted. It's not like we aren't doing something with our day, because even if we're sitting around, we're focused on TV. So it's not necessarily this thing that we need to cultivate. It's this thing that we need to focus more like a laser beam, so that we don't have 30 of them in our lives. Maybe we have 10 or 5 or 3. So that was really cool. And then one other thing, and you could jump off of whatever one excites you.
Sure.
Is then I was looking at when things get in the way that are avoidable and things that get in the way that are unavoidable. So as far as things that are avoidable, I thought of them as a shadow. So the further you get them away from the light, and the sooner you get them away from the destination, the less they impact the light. So that's sort of an avoidable obstacle. The unavoidable obstacles, I started getting into refraction, deflection, and all these things that happen with light, how they bend around things that are unmovable. And, one of the really cool things I found with that is how the light coming in that bounces off something is called the incident ray. And I just think it's really interesting that the word is actually incident when describing that ray. And it was actually the incidents that do different things with our focus. And I'm just giving you the palette of paint to see which one excites you.
Sure.
And
well,
and this is a good one.
Okay, good.
Sometimes, we're so busy putting our focus on something instead of looking where our focus already is. Because sometimes it's not about what we put our focus on, but it's understanding where our focus is and feeding it more, because our focus is actually teaching us something about ourselves that we may not know of who we really are, who we really are truly created to be. So fire, wherever you like.
Yeah, I think the second topic, quite honestly, probably would be, probably a whole hour in itself. That sounds like we'd have to break that down in a multiple different ways. And I think that the other two, they're sort of interconnected, for at least for the way I'm thinking about it. The first one, for me, really goes back to what we've talked about before. We have this self-awareness that we've talked about in the past that leads you to sort of the ensuring that you're prioritizing the right things. And to your point, whether we're conscious of it or not, whether we're doing the things that are connected to our focus or what we want our priorities to be, we're focused on something, whether it's sitting there watching television or, doing things and activities that are connected to our priorities. The focus is there one way or the other. And so the interesting part to this, and what, I'd really like to, dive into more specific things that happened this week for you. But I think from the standpoint of some of the conversations we've had in the past, to exploit and maximize the priorities in your life, focus needs to be something that you're conscious of on a regular basis. So that way, there's nothing wrong with doing those things that are maybe not always connected to your priorities. I mean, you have, maybe some downtime here or there, but it goes back to everyone has time to do whatever they want to do. And it's where you put your focus that ultimately maximizes those opportunities for you. So that's what I kind of connected to in the first part there.
And I think a lot of people also try to, because of this overbooking of schedules and this ability to try to create time, multitasking has become popular. And it's really been a detriment to focus because you never get anything done as well as quickly or are able to get to levels of new creation with diverting your focus, when it comes to one specific topic, unless you trip over it, which obviously can happen. And even with multitasking, I think there needs to be an aspect of focus on priority so that it doesn't just become about a way to gain time. It still needs to be productive.
Well, I think that the multitasking also is, and it is confused by people and what that means and how that's executed, because whether
it can be done right.
Well, exactly. I mean, there when you create a list of things to do, let's just say for today, you can do multiple things kind of consecutively, but when you're doing the individual task, you need to be focused on the individual task. You can't be focused on the individual task and then two or three other things.
Right.
So you might multitask and say, okay, I'm going to take a break from this and then go to this other task and then come back to that. And that could be defined as multitasking. I also know people who have that same list of things to do, and they create an organized way that they're going to do it in a specific order, and they're not considered multitasking because they're not doing multiple things consecutively. But ultimately, this list still gets done. They just do it in a specific order because
that's interesting. That stop and start
right.
aspect of it, I never really considered as multi, but it actually is better because you can let those other areas slip into the unconscious and get powered up and come back to them even better.
Yeah. And I think that the confusing part about, or the almost like multitasking is seen as a positive, as an attribute. It's it's viewed as being something as a positive attribute, but the reality is that there is a limitation on what certain people can do as it relates to multitasking, and how sometimes being a good multitasker can mean that you have no focus on anything properly because you're trying to do too many things at once. And then a lot of times I find that those people seem to be overwhelmed by all the things that they're trying to do, instead of trying to figure out a way that could either streamline that for them, or in some cases just eliminate some of the things that they are trying to do because they're not really, again, connected to the things that they've defined as priorities. So, but it all still connects to, at the end of the day, to maximize whatever it is you want, you have to be focused in that moment and be present in that moment to accomplish that goal, which is ultimately what really kind of led us, I think, to be one of the words for this week, is because just wanted to talk at least briefly. I obviously don't need to go into the details of what the accomplishment, because you are still working on it, but the completion of your first draft of your book was a huge accomplishment, and obviously required a level of focus. So I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit as it relates to focus.
Yeah, I guess so. The best way to talk about it is to talk about the experience, because
yep.
Usually that's a lot more even possibly exciting than the content, because as human beings, I think that's the one connection we have beyond the content and our interests. There's still who we are and what we can understand about each other and how we can help each other in those ways is really what we can do best to help each other be whatever avenue we want to apply our human abilities to. So yeah, for me it was, there's those things you have, and I don't even know if a book was as strong as this, like like you talked about the guitar last week. I
mm-hmm.
wish I played guitar, I wish I did karate, or I wish I didn't quit piano, or
right.
Whatever people have during their life. I don't know if the book was on that level. So I guess that's an interesting point for, you don't have to really regret something to have the energy to do something.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I didn't have to beat myself up about it. It was just something that sort of made sense to me. And it was questions I noticed that I was answering every day for people. And in, my attempt to be efficient with time, and I wouldn't say multitask, but I always am looking for a way to combine my passions so that winning multiple moments at once. So if that is taking information I use each day, the podcast, a book, a video, and I can combine them all together, as I work out those concepts, they become deeper and better than when they started. So the more environments I can put myself around the conversations that I'm trying to have to help people, the better I'm able to help people. So it started with just writing all this stuff down in a book, and then the pages starting to grow, and there was an energy that started to get created to where, I was getting to bed later than I usually do. I was popping up earlier just to get started on things, but I would find myself 8, 10, 12 hours later still back at the computer, working on this book. And I would say it really would make sense to me to use an analogy that the book was just a seed when it started. I mean, I knew a tree was inside, but the process, is just so enjoyable to see something that, is happening through you and is a part of you, but, it's becoming something alongside of you too, and not only am I changing it, but it's changing me. And it's just a really great process.
So did you find that you at some point needed to make the time in your schedule for it, or did you just maybe a little bit of hybrid about what I'm about to ask the second portion, or did you just find inspirational moments and said, okay, I'm going to write because I'm inspired to write, or was there a little bit of combination of the two things there?
I'll tell you a couple keystone moments. So first it was shining, one ray of light on it. And then I started taking other rays of light from other things, if you consider light time. And I would just put more and more focus on it. And the more and more momentum it built up, the more and more time I spent on it. And then there became a moment where I was kind of becoming burdened with it. I need to do this. I need to read through this again. I don't feel like reading one more page.
Right.
But I would just have this conversation where I was like, one more paragraph, one more page, just to this section. And what was really cool is I was documenting it. I was documenting the days. I was documenting how far I did, little thoughts I had about the project. So it kind of became a diary of it. So it wasn't just exciting about the book. It was starting to get excited about the diary of the project. And I remember one moment, I was walking my dog Zoe, and I thought to myself, about this burden. And I thought to myself, wait a second, if this feels like I don't want to do it anymore, this is the closest I've ever gotten to writing a book. And that re-inspired me.
Right. Yeah. You were at sort of at that point where you're kind of like when we jumped in the ocean, your brain was like, well, I don't have to do this. I really shouldn't do this. Coming up with all the excuses on why you don't need to do this. And when the reality was you were way closer to accomplishing something than you ever were before. So why not just get it over the finish line? Right. So,
well, I used it as a strength.
Right.
I used, wait a second, this feeling, is happening at a time when I'm closer to accomplishing something that I wanted to accomplish before and never even made it this far. Why would you, ever stop now or let any thought get in the way or let anything get you have your focus diverted at all at this moment? And, and then there are other moments that continue to do that, like, printing it out. I mean, that's no different than doing it on the computer.
Right.
But that was just another moment of holding it.
Yeah.
That has given it a whole nother level.
Yeah, I was unfortunately unable to I would have loved to have spoken at that moment, because the picture you sent me, I've seen that smile on your face before, but that was probably even though
after
to your
30
point,
beers,
right? Yeah, well, not just that, but even after 30 waves, the same thing. So it's been it was great to see that picture, because I know what that joy is. Unfortunately, we just didn't have the ability to communicate at that time, but I'm sure that there's still a little bit of that joy that's still there every time you look at it. So, and I guess I had some of the opposite examples of focus this week, where a lot of my stress related issues related to work were because people on my team were unable to be focused on the things that were important. And ultimately it was creating issues, not just for them, but for myself, for their team. And it was and unfortunately it was related to some compensation for people and the level of work. I mean, I spent almost 2 days probably 1.5 solid days of my week cleaning up messes that people on my team created because they were unwilling or not able to be as focused as they need to be on that task. And that was very disappointing that I had to, it was not something that I'm necessarily responsible in doing. I'm there to verify, but through that verification process, I found all these problems. And when you're talking about properly compensating people within your organization, you have to make sure that's correct. And I found problem after problem after problem. And it was and the opposite example of all the bad that can happen when, we could potentially undercompensate or overcompensate people in a way that would be bad for the organization or bad for the employee because the managers didn't do their job properly, were not focused properly, right? So they didn't make the time. So it was a very interesting word that developed throughout the week. For me, I just happen to have the opposite example, but it still stems from the same word, the same.
And the same opportunity still exists.
For sure, because what came from that, and what I ultimately had to sit down with the managers and review is how they need to be organized in a way that allows for time to be prioritized for a task as important as this, and because their team is going to be motivated or not motivated if they don't do this correctly, and or if they do it correctly, they will be. So there's a level of organization. That's why I kind of was leading with that question about how you made time commitment for the book, because there is some level of commitment of time that you have to make for something that's as important as this. And then ultimately because that allows for you to stay in that window, whatever it is, an hour, 2 hours, whatever that requires on whatever task it is, to be focused in a way that you don't have to, you can block everything out. One of the things I constantly tell my team is make appointments in your calendar for yourself. And what I'm saying there is that in that 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour window, you do not answer phones and you do not answer emails. You do the tasks that you're asking yourself to do, and you don't get bothered by the rest of the stuff. And this is no different than, you making the time for writing the book, right? And what's interesting about today, in today's world, the ability to be focused is easier than ever, even though there's all these abilities, things that can distract us, right? You just pick up your device and you'll be distracted by a million things. And so people almost say to themselves, these devices are bad, when the reality is look at all the apps and tools that the phone and iPad comes with. And there's a million tools on there that can keep you organized and focused on the things that are important to you. I mean, everything that we do in this conversation and these podcasts are all connected to apps, notes on phones, notes on iPads. You and I don't print anything out. We don't really write. You write a little bit in some notebooks, but for the most part, most of our stuff is done digitally, and we use the tool to gain time and to allow for us to have hyper focus on what we want to talk about. And I think that's one of the things that when I thought about the word, I think gets lost because it's so easy to just blame the technology for distractions, which it easily can be, but it also can be used for you.
Yeah, I've had a nice little streak going where I've sort of, some of the the light, analogy. I've taken light off Facebook, Instagram, Google, because what happened is on your phone, there's this phone time you're doing, how much time you're on the phone, what apps you're in, what you're doing. And I saw that the other day.
Right.
And it was just such an awesome thing to see, because it reshifted all that. But the greatest part is it all went into the book.
So, that's great.
Yeah. So, it was just, just one thing on the phone. And I don't even remember. I wish I could have known when I saw that, and when the energy or focus increased into the book, it may have been simultaneous. So maybe sometimes it's not just starting something. Maybe it's sometimes cutting something off and creating space, and naturally you'll gravitate and put that focus into areas that are more important to you without you even having to know it. But without that space, you're so clogged,
right,
that you can't even, there's no space for creativity or anything else that you need.
Yeah, and the only last point that I wrote down that I think that because most of our discussion so far on the word focus has been things that are specific to us as individuals, the experience with you writing the book, and then things that are applicable to work for me. But the other thing I wrote down this week was I also learned a little bit of a lesson, or at least reminded of this, is how important it is to be focused on others. Right. And it's so hard. It's so easy to get wrapped up in just being focused on yourself. But there have been examples all week for me on how, it's how important it is to be focused on your wife, how important it is to be focused on your kids, on the things that are important to you. And I know this is sort of rehashing some old topics, but that's really where you're going to ultimately find the joy in your life, because that's all connected to the things that you should be or have already prioritized in your life. So why wouldn't you spend more focus on that and give yourself up in that way, instead of what's good for me? How can I be only focused on my agenda? So making time, and the kind of the word that I got after that came off the focus was listen, because the listening part was the part that is really most important when you're focused on others. Listening to them, listening to what they're saying, listening to what their needs are. At least that was the lesson I got from it for myself. And
it's amazing how we're actually wired differently than we think. So we think taking care of ourselves is the best way to take care of ourselves, but it never brings the joy, the peace, the love, and the things you're truly looking for unless you're taking care of others. It's just, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to grasp giving up your time. It's hard to grasp the word sacrifice. It's hard to grasp all those words that sound like you have a less of a life, and it ends up leading to a much greater life when you serve and love and care for others. And that focus on yourself, also gets into that dangerous ground of pride.
Yep.
And, that's what the one thing about, Paul in the Bible was, he was given a thorn in his side because he was given such great revelation to help people. He was also given a thorn so that he would stay dependent, on God. And focusing on things that are what I would call a multiplier are things, like serving others, focusing on your faith or whatever your anchors are. When you focus on big things, they multiply in every other area of your life. So you don't have to focus and divert that beam to every little thing in every little area and worry about if it's going to be moving forward for you. If you focus on a multiplier like your wife or like your kids or, or like God, everything's going to change for you just by doing that.
So I would like to, at some point, perhaps this week, jump on another podcast in midweek. I'll be on the road, and we could maybe dive into that. I'd like to think about that light concept a little bit and dive into that further, because I think that's probably a whole 20 minutes right there just on that aspect of it, if we can make that time this week. So but I appreciate being able to put this together. We've been back and forth for a couple days, and so is there anything else that you wanted to add as it relates to focus before we go on our day?
I guess just the one little thought that I was really glad that we got on and did this morning, because, one thing about focus, when you speak to yourself, you want to believe that what you're saying is going to happen, and you need that to happen for your focus. And if there's any kinks in your armor of where, you lose some integrity, it's hard to keep focus. So it's, keeping your word in the little things can really help, your power and focus in the bigger things.
For sure. Along those lines, I want to go ahead and let everybody know that we've officially opened our YouTube channel. The Wags and Fresh podcast YouTube channel is open. We just set it up. We are just in the process of uploading some previous episodes and things like that. But moving forward, we'll start using that tool to use as a resource for people to find these podcasts as well. So just wanted to add that into the conversation today. And for me, I appreciate this opportunity to talk this morning. I'm headed out of the cold and into the warmth of Florida for the week. So I'll look forward to that. I actually thinking about bringing the board down and jumping in the ocean. So I just have to try to pack it up and get it down there. So no issues on that. All right.
That's awesome. All right. Have a safe flight.
Hey, thanks, man. Talk to you soon. Be well.
All right, see ya.
Take care.